Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Climate-Wise Communities Bushfire Workshop. My name is James Chan. I'm a Sustainability Project Officer here at Ku-ring-gai Council. And on behalf of Council, I recognize the Darug people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we stand. Ku-ring-gai Council is proud of its Aboriginal heritage and culture, and we especially recognize this in my welcome to you. I'd also like to acknowledge the way they've maintained the traditional custodians of the land had maintained the land which we stand in such fantastic condition. They worked with the land and they were very good at looking after it. And I'd like to just recognize what they've done and that we have a lot to learn from them. So tonight with us for this workshop, we have Mark Schuster, who is our Bushfire technical officer.
Hello all.
Hi, Mark. We have Captain Nick Wilson from the Ku-ring-gai Rural Bushfire Brigade, and we also have Sam Tucker from the Ku-ring-gai Bushfire Brigade. And joining us shortly will be Dr. Jenny Scott. And from New South Wales Fire and Rescue, we have, sorry, it's not Kel, it's
Mark Mackay.
Mark Mackay, sorry. In the system, I set up the invitation as Cal McNamara, but Cal can't make it here, so Mark is here in his place. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get stuck into it. On your screen, you should be able to see a Q&A function. Now, that's where you can put your questions if you have any for us. Please put all your questions there, and that will help us manage them. And also, you should also be able to vote for questions that you think are the ones you want to ask anyway, in case someone's already asked them. And you can vote for those questions so that they can pop up the queue and we can get to those in case there's a lot of questions. We also have a chat function. So if you have any technical issues that you want to raise or any other points that are not necessarily questions about the content, please put those issues into the chat box. So, so the run of the workshop will be basically we will go through the campfire reconstruction, which is a reconstruction of a fire that happened in California in 2018, and then we also have a progression of the Gospels Mountain fire that happened during the Black Sun bushfires. I'm sure everyone here is fairly familiar with that. Then after that, we'll go into an actual simulation of a bushfire within the Ku-ring-gai area. So if you just bear with me for one moment, we have some technical issues I need to address. Dr. Jenny Scott is trying to join us, and I will have to just quickly see to that and hopefully help her out. So just bear with me. If you haven't made a cup of tea already, or coffee, or you have dinner in front of you, by all means, now's a good opportunity just to top up your supplies for the workshop, or even maybe prepare some questions that you might want us to answer. Perhaps in the meantime, Sam, Nick, and Mark, and Mike, perhaps you want to sort of have a chat amongst yourselves about the new fire danger ratings. Actually, I think that'd be a great thing to talk about while I address these technical issues. So the RFS has released new fire danger ratings. They've been updated to be easy to understand. They come with actions and with updated science. And so I'm not the expert. I'll hand over to the actual fire people to talk about. So off to you, Nick, Sam, and Mark. Mike.
Well, the new fire danger rating system has actually changed from 6 ratings down to 4, and this is to bring New South Wales in line of a national standard and makes it much easier for members of the public to put their fire plan into action. So we have a white line which indicates that there's a very low fire danger rating, such as when it's raining or at the moment. But of course, that doesn't eliminate your risk. We then have moderate, high, extreme, and catastrophic. And each one of those fire danger ratings actually has an action. So it can help you put your fire plan into place. Did you want to add anything to that, Nick?
Yeah,
Mark?
so I think the good thing about the new fire danger rating system is that it's national, so it applies to all states of Australia. So it doesn't matter which state you're in, it's going to be the same. Whereas before we had different ratings in different states. The other good thing about it is that it is only 4, as Sam said, and each rating is linked to a particular action. So previously people weren't sure what they needed to do depending on what the rating was. So for instance, moderate rating means that you need to plan and prepare. The high rating means that on days like that, you should be ready to act if a fire was to start. On an extreme rating, you really need to take action now. And that means that, you know, if part of your plan is to leave and leave early, then you should leave, you know, where you're located. And the final rating is catastrophic. And that, you know, that is where you just must leave and get out well before the fire front approaches. So it's a much simpler rating system. It's consistent across all states, and each rating has an action linked to it. Virtually all of the signs have now changed. Certainly in our district, in the Hornsby Ku-ring-gai district, all the signs have changed, and they're gradually changing throughout New South Wales.
Could I also add something to that? That the SES have adopted the same danger rating system for floods and storms. So it actually makes a very consistent story across Australia. Mark, did you have anything to add?
Is that Mike from Fire and Rescue or myself? I'll go on to a different tangent.
Either or.
Anything from Fire and Rescue at all?
Okay, well, I think I might just jump in there. Now, because I was busy dealing with some technical issues, did we cover on, did you discuss the actual specific actions that are associated with each? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Oh, that's perfect. Okay, great. Because I think actually that innovation there, apart from the simplification of having a fewer categories, I think having the actual specific actions associated with each fire danger rating is actually really, really important, because it allows you to think about incorporate those different those fire danger levels into your bushfire survival plan. And so, you know, there's less interpretation about what to do. You just says, okay, if it's that, I just do this, and then you go and do your plan and take action. I think it's a really, really good initiative, and it should be quite effective, I think, for everyone in the next fire season, especially as La Nina now actually is forecast to tail off at the end of spring. So we could be going back to normal summer conditions for Christmas. So that means, or it might dry out, and it might mean that, you know, while it might not be as bad as the black summer conditions, it could still mean we could still have fires this summer despite all the rain. And I'm sure Mark and everyone else will say that it only takes 2 weeks of really hot weather for fuel to cure and then to start. So anyway, I'd like to welcome Dr. Jenny Scott to the workshop. Say hello, Jenny. And I'd like to just quickly also give everyone a brief background to the program itself, to the Clamwise Community Program. This program was developed in the wake of the 2009 Black Saturday fires, and it incorporates the findings of the Royal Commission. One of the key findings that came out of the Royal Commission was that very few people had bushfire survival plans, and those that did, they didn't work very well because they didn't take into account all the different ways a fire could happen, and all the different random scenarios that could pop up and that could derail their plans. So the aim of this workshop is to help you think about what's the worst case scenario and all the things that could happen that could derail your plans, so that if this was to happen in Ku-ring-gai, you would be prepared for it. And anything less than the worst case scenario, you should be able to handle it fairly easily and stay safe and keep your loved ones and your pets nice and safe as well. So I will also the sim table. This whole workshop is centered around the sim table, which is technology we got from the United States, and we purchased it back in 2019, just in time for the Black Summer bushfires. And it was developed. It was former U.S. military technology. It was developed in Los Alamos labs in, I believe, Santa Fe. And in fact, bushfires were threatening those labs, and the boffins over in the labs, they were able to reprogram the sim table to simulate bushfire. And then they realized they had a product on their hands, and they commercialized it, and that's how we got hold of it. So, and I'll show you the sim table now. I'll share my screen, and might take a couple of seconds for it to pop up on your screens as well. But what you see in front of you is essentially what you'd see in the in-person workshops, because normally we would run these workshops in person, but due to the popularity of these workshops and COVID was also a motivating factor, we had to move from having a 3D workshop where we would have a tray of crushed walnut shell and a projector on top, shining this image onto the tray of crushed walnut shell. This walnut shell would then be shaped to create the contours and shapes of the landscape, creating the 3D effect, and then we could start the fire on that table. But because we're doing it via Zoom now, you only get to see a 2D image. In the top left of the screen, you can see a wind speed direction and wind speed and direction controller. By pulling the area in various directions, you can change those variables there. That can change the behavior of the fire. We also have at the bottom a play button and speed controls will allow us to speed up and slow down the simulation. Below is the date, and sometimes you see an area burnt number there as well. But for the first two we show you, you will only see the date and time. And apart from that, there's nothing else to show you. And then I will. So now I've covered off on how the sim table works. I'll pass over to Dr. Jenny Scott, who will give you a rundown of what happened in November 2018 in California. Over to you, Dr. Jenny Scott.
So the reason why we show you this particular fire is because it was the perfect storm. Just about everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And there weren't any real black swan events in this. Everything could have been anticipated to be likely to happen. I think it just happened a whole lot faster than anybody thought it would. So the fire ignited from fallen power lines, because even at 6 a.m. in the morning, the wind was gusting to over 80 kilometres an hour. So the fire units were dispatched up to where the fire was burning. You'll see in the top right-hand corner, this is an actual footprint of the fire as it progressed. And the problem was the mountain roads were too narrow and windy for the fire trucks to get to the seat of the fire. So they were not able to extinguish it early. Also because the aerial appliances couldn't go up because the wind was gusting beyond their capability that they fly. So this fire ran unchecked. It was a red flag day, which is like our extreme weather day. And people in the townships of Polga and Paradise could see the smoke and rang the two dispatchers that were on duty for 911 in the area and asked about the smoke, and they were told that it was well north of them and nothing was to worry them, and if there was anything to be worried about, they'd get an alert. So as this fire progressed, it started spotting well ahead of the fire front, which you'll see come up in a minute, which meant that this fire travelled a lot further, a lot faster than anybody anticipated. And so by the time they started putting the warnings out to people, several of the cell phone towers had come down, and so they couldn't get the warnings out. In Polga, they've been evacuating as we speak, and over in Paradise, they were still told that there's nothing to worry about and just wait for any more information. But as you'll see shortly, under these high wind, very dry and mountainous conditions, up pops another spot fire. Now that's about 20 kilometres from the original fire. So in the space of approximately an hour, the fire has actually spread to the outskirts of Paradise. Now Paradise hadn't had a fire in quite a number of years, so people felt relatively safe. But when the authorities went to put out the alerts, they forgot several of their zones of the areas. So the firefighters were going out to different areas and telling people to get out, to leave immediately, but they didn't get to tell everybody. And as a result, afterwards, they found that only about 20% of the population actually got the warning. The rest didn't hear anything. And so they start leaving. You can see, if you've got good eyes, there is a road to the north, a road to the south, and another road out to the west. And as these spot fires picked up in intensity, which they did very rapidly, they started sending out more embers, and the embers were traveling on the wind ahead of the fire front again. And so you'll see on the far side of the township of Paradise that there are new spot fires starting to emerge. And as these spot fires emerged, it gradually cut off the existing exits out of the town. So by now, a lot of people were on the road. And as the fire got closer and closer to the highways, they started shutting down the roads. And so these people couldn't turn around, they couldn't go back, they were stuck on the highway. And as you can see, the fire is very rapidly expanding. Now to the slightly south and to the east, you'll see a whole new little cluster of spot fires start. And these spot fires very rapidly cut off that eastern exit. So the exit to the north is being cut off. The exit to the south and the east is being cut off. So in a town where they had thousands of people trapped, the best they could do was try and get people to as safe an area as possible. And as the firefighters said on the day, it's just wiping us out. In the end, there was nearly 90 people killed in this fire. They lost about 180,000, I think it was, properties. And they had significant losses, both insured and uninsured losses. So apart from the simple loss of life. And if you ever look at any photos taken from the satellites after this fire has gone through the town of Paradise, you'll see that barely a building was left standing. It was incredibly intense, incredibly fast. And so we talk about these events being rare, but the problem is they're getting less rare because the conditions are changing thanks to climate change. And we can anticipate, as Black Summer taught us, there are going to be more of these very fast moving events. I don't know if Nick or Sam want to add anything to that.
Yeah, well, I think certainly most people listening would have seen what happened in the 2019-2020 fires, and we're going to see that shortly in the simulation. So, you know, this is a very good example of what can happen when you have these large mega fires, and it just highlights the need for people to plan, and that's what this presentation is all about.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add also that most people don't realise that nearly 90% of all house losses in Australian history have been due to ember attack. Embers falling in gutters, embers wedging in the subsurface of the floor, all those ember type issues rather than direct radiant heat against the wall of the house. So yeah, ember attack is a really huge issue, particularly seeing Ku-ring-gai has 100 kilometres of bushland urban interface. So really big issue. I can't emphasise that enough. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. So this just gives you an idea of how rapidly these megafires can move and how devastating they can be. We now have an example from Black Summer, which you probably all heard of, the Gosper Mountain fire. And that was a particularly interesting fire because it was the biggest fire in New South Wales history, covering the largest area. And a couple of times it nearly was extinguished. And then it took off again a few days later. And then you'll see, James will take you through it, as the spot fires start, just how rapidly this thing grew into a monster. It started slowly and then just took off. So James.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny. So as already discussed, and as many of you already in Australian history, it started on the 26th of October 2019 and was only put out by extreme rainfall around about the 8th of February 2020. The fire burnt a total of 512,000 hectares, 90 homes were lost, and countless animals and insects were killed. So the conditions leading up to the fire, it was the hottest and driest year on record. The 3 years prior, from January 2017 to December 2019, were areas of New South Wales had the lowest rainfall on record. All of New South Wales was declared in drought. Also, there was New South Wales had experienced the lowest fuel moisture levels and the highest forest fire danger index of all previous fire seasons. And that point about low fuel moisture levels is very important to remember. Also, their records were being set on a number of days with very high or greater fire danger. Also, there was no research post the fire found that there was no evidence that the fire was driven by high fuel loads or poor forest management. It was most likely the fact that there were average fuel loads, and the record-breaking fuel dryness led to the intensity and ferociousness of the fire and the speed in which the fire moved. To emphasize that point, there were even reports of crown fires in recently burnt areas in the Blue Mountains. So, as I mentioned, the fire started on the 26th of October, and it was from a lightning strike. And just before I carry on, because it's this fire burnt for such a long time, few months, I'm going to have to speed the simulation up, speed it up and slow it down various times. So you will see the fire moving at abnormally fast speeds at some points, but I'll talk you through it so you understand what's going on. Because for a large portion of the fire, nothing much actually happens apart from just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So there was a lightning storm in the region on the 26th of October, and one of those strikes, which happened outside the main storm area, started the fire in the Gospers Mountain region. You can see the Gospers Mountain just not far away from where there was that ignition point. In fact, there was about there was about 19,000 lightning strikes that day in particular. So 2 hours after the fire started, 65 hectares were burnt. So there were also high winds in the area, which meant that the helicopters could not fly and the raft teams could not be inserted. Now, the raft teams are essentially a fast response, rugged area sort of firefighters that get inserted to put fires out. So the winds were too high for them to go in. The wind also made it a very fast moving fire. So by the next day, the 27th, and you can see the 27th is there at the bottom of your screen, in American format as well, so the month is ahead of the day. You can see that 520 hectares were burnt. And it's important to note that at this point in time, there were fires all around the state and interstate, so resources were stretched quite thinly. So so the fire progresses, it burns burns quickly. However, it does slow down around about the 5th and 6th of November due to a bit of rain. So we'll speed things up a little bit so we can get to that point. So just bear with me. So despite the fact that nothing much is happening, it still is quite a fast moving fire. So around about, as mentioned, at around about the 6th of November, rain essentially puts the fire out. Well, it doesn't put it out, but it slows it down quite considerably. In fact, it was described as going to sleep. However, on the 7th of November, and I'll speed things up to get to the 7th so you can see what happens there, there was quite a significant weather change that led to the fire to rise up and to have quite a scary fire run. So in fact, the fire travels up to about, I think 12 kilometers in one day. So I'll stop talking now and let the simulation do the talking for me. Should come up any moment. Yeah, so that's it there. That's quite a big fire run. So that's 12 kilometers in one day. And I'll zoom out to give you a bit of perspective as to how big the fire is now. So at this stage, the fire is so big that nothing much could really stop it. The next significant point in the timeline of the fire is on the 12th of November, which is coming up shortly. Now, on the 12th of November, we saw the first declaration of a catastrophic fire danger day in the region. And the conditions on this day saw another big fire run to the southwest. The progress of the fire was very fast, and at this point, it's creating its own weather. The fire had a big run, traveling 12 kilometers in just 2.5 hours. So bear in mind, the previous run was 12 kilometers in one day. The second fire run was 12 kilometers in 2.5 hours. It's very, very fast. Also, the fire is at this level of intensity where it was creating its own weather. So RFS volunteers reported seeing a pyrocumulonimbus forming over the fire grounds, creating lightning strikes that started other spot fires in the area. So I'll press play now and let you see what that fire run looked like. The fire also progresses on the north and south boundaries at the same time as well. So it's happening all around. There you go. That's the fire run there. You can see how quickly it goes. So by the end of the day, the fire has now burnt 56,000 hectares and has a perimeter of around about 170 kilometers. It was around about the same time that the Canoe Road fire broke out in Ku-ring-gai in South Tarahumara. I'm sure everyone remembers what that was like with the tanker dropping the retardant on people's homes and on the fire. And we're very lucky that the tanker was able to do that for us. So the next significant part of the fire starts happening around about the 18th of November, which is coming up shortly. It's where we can see the spotting behavior. We can see how spot fires are started by embers traveling far ahead of the fire front. So to the southeast, you can see spot fires appearing there. Now they start happening over to the south of the fire, and at other points of the simulation, you see them popping up all over the place. So the effect that this has on the fire is that it just simply makes the fire travel a lot faster, in effect, and it also makes the fire a lot larger because these spot fires then join up to the main fire front, main fire body. Okay, and if we'll just now fast forward to the 26th of November, that sees additional fire weather in the storm weather in the region. Now, this storm activity leads to a microburst that's damaged areas of Gordon, in fact. So we see rain happening at the same time as lightning strikes, further exacerbating the fire in the region. So on the 27th, which is coming up shortly, we see lightning strikes happening in the northwest. These lightning strikes set off fires that were now called the Little L Complex, the Thompson's Creek, and 3 Mile Creek fire. So you can see them appearing here in the northeast of the main fire front. And then around about the 28th, which is past now, we see more spot fires around the region, sparking fires further north. So at this point, Sam and Nick, do you want to, you guys, and I think Mike, you probably have experience with this campaign, with this fire. So do you want to share what it was like to be fighting fires at this point in time?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll kick off. Look, as I mentioned, the 2019-2020 season was an extraordinary season, not only because of this fire, but because of the number of fires that were occurring right across the East Coast. The season actually started would have been July, and we had trucks up in southeast Queensland, or crews up in southeast Queensland, and then the fires just progressively moved south throughout that year, and the end of the fire season wasn't until February the following year. So, an 8-month fire season where trucks were constantly deployed. So our trucks at Ku-ring-gai weren't in the station for most of that 8 months. They were right around the state. So when this fire broke out, there was great concern about what was going to happen. And I recall there was a large briefing held at Glenorrhea Station where we got all of the brigades together from Hills, Hornsby, Ku-ring-gai, and Northern Beaches, and talked about the need to try and keep this fire on the other side of the Hawkesbury, because if it came into our district, there was probably no stopping it, and it would go right through Ku-ring-gai, as the fires did in 94 and 2003. So there was a lot of focus on it, but as James mentioned, fires of this size, you can't put them out. All you can do is slow them down with backburning and protect homes and properties through defensive measures, and that's what the crews were doing. We spent most of the time trying to put in backburns, some of them successful, some of them unsuccessful, to try and slow it down.
Great. Thanks, Nick, for that. Yeah, I can't imagine what it'd be like to have to be sort of in that situation. So let's hope that doesn't happen again. So anyway, back to the fire. Around about the 5th of November of December, I think all the main all those other fires to the north of the main Goss's Manor fire join up to the main fire there. And at this point, the fire is called is now officially the mega blaze. A really, really big fire. And then not long after that, it joins up with the Paddock Run and Thompson's Creek fire. So I think I'll fast forward to the next key point in this simulation, reconstruction, and that's something which happened in the Mount Wilson Bellslana Road area. So I'll quickly fast forward there, and just while I do that, while the fire is moving at a fast pace, just keep an eye on how the fire spreads to the north there, and just keep an eye on how it just grows and grows and grows. So so what happened on the 14th was actually a backburn that was planned, and the intention of this backburn was to help slow and contain the fire around the areas where people might be living in the Mount Wilson and Bellslana Road area. So the weather conditions on the day were forecast to be quite mild, and in fact they were quite mild on the day, with little or no wind. However, by 2 p.m., there was the wind had picked up from the southwesterly direction, and that was unexpected, and that caused havoc with the backburn. So within so not long after the backburn had started, the spot overs started happening, and then within 30 minutes, crews were doing proper protection. So you'll see that happen quite soon. So I'll speed things up a bit, so that will happen now. But it was a very, very quick moving fire, and that caught a lot of people off guard. So it should happen shortly there now. So yeah, again, the weather conditions were quite mild, but you know, it just goes to show that things can be very unpredictable, and in these conditions, you know, like anything can happen. So it should happen any moment now.
I think it's paused, isn't it?
Oh no, there it is.
Oh, right.
So the backburn happens, and then it gets out of control very, very quickly. It crosses the Bells Line Road, and then yeah, it's at a point where it happened very, very quickly. So as you can see, the speed in which that happened, the main body of the fire, of the fire isn't moving nearly as fast as that fire down there near Mount Wilson. So it just goes to show that the terrain there and the weather conditions were in that specific location were quite bad. So at this point now, the fire is the biggest fire in Australian history, and it is in fact 5 times bigger than Singapore. The fire is now 350,000 hectares. So essentially, the fire is now at the worst. We've got the point now in the fire where most of the main events have happened. However, the fire does continue to burn, and in fact, as you can see down in the southwest of the fire, it's impacting the town of Lithgow, and that's the last major action of the fire there. So, however, at this point, fire crews, the RFS fire crews, were working very hard to stop the fire jumping the Hawkesbury River, as Nick mentioned, and strike teams from interstate and overseas joined the action to help stop the fire from jumping the Hawkesbury. So at this point in time, like as Nick mentioned, there was a fear that if the fire did jump the Hawkesbury, that wouldn't be much that could be done to stop it. So Hornsby and Hills district councils were drawing up evacuation plans for the event that the fire did make its way into the northern reaches of Sydney. So it was projected that the fire could actually travel from the Wiseman's Ferry to the North Shore of Sydney within 1 day, and that's highly possible if you consider if you remember how fast the fire could actually travel. We saw just recently how the backburn moved very quickly, or the out of control backburn moved very quickly, and how the 2 previous fire runs again moved very fast. In fact, 12 kilometers in just 2.5 hours. So yeah, it gives you an idea how likely that is to happen. So luckily, southerly wind blew flames back in on the main fire, and that helped crews contain the fire. And so, as we know, history has told us that it didn't jump to Hawkesbury, which is very lucky for us. However, it's this scenario that we like you to keep in mind when we show you the next simulation, because we'd like you to think about what would happen, what if this fire was not contained at the Hawkesbury, and if it did jump the river and started making its way towards North Sydney, what would you do? How would you react? And what would the fire be like had it actually started in, say, the St. Ives area in the Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park? So at this point, I'll stop the simulation and conclude this portion by mentioning that the fire was only put out around on the 8th of February 2020 by an extreme rainfall event, and this rainfall event filled Warragamba Dam from 40%, so we're under stage 2 water restrictions at this point, and then the Warragamba Dam went up to 90% being full. So it's quite an extreme turnaround from being extreme drought through to extreme bushfire through to extreme rainfall, filling water storage up to close to 90%. So Jenny, I'll just pass back over to you while I set up the next portion of the workshop.
Thanks, James. Yes, I think if recent history has taught us anything, the word extreme is not describing what's going on nearly well enough. So Council has had for some years now a program called Climate Wise Communities. And like James said earlier, it was based on research done by RMIT after the Black Saturday fires. And as he said, very few people had bushfire plans. And of those people who did have them, they almost universally failed. And the researchers were looking at why did they fail? So a lot of the tools that the researchers developed to get people to think about the possibility that the fire might happen in a completely different way to how they anticipate it will happen. And so we're creating a simulation as though that Gosford Mountain fire had continued on. And we're going to burn it across the whole northern area of Ku-ring-gai. Now, just bear in mind, there's no way of knowing exactly how a fire like that would have impacted the area. But this is just one of possibly 1,000 ways. But it just shows you the high variability as the weather changes, and the high variability in terms of the direction the fire is taking, the speed at which it's traveling, and just how deep into the urban area those embers might fall. So, Mark, I know you've got a great interest in the embers. How has the research showed us how far those embers can fall into an urban area?
It's actually on winds, they can travel a long, long way. I'm from Queensland originally. I worked in fire management there. And if some of you know Bribie Island, which is north of Brisbane, away from the mainland, embers from a pine forest fire are carried on a westerly breeze 25 kilometres across and started new spot fires on Bribie Island in pine plantations there, so they can travel an awful long way. And I want to emphasise also there's two different types of fires. There's smaller fire runs, which are often driven by the forest fuels. There's about 5 layers from the ground up to the canopy of different types of fuels that a fire consumes. But the bigger sort of mega fires are wind-driven or weather-driven fires, actually. And they're the ones to really watch because they can spot up to 10 to 20 kilometres ahead of the fire front. So with climate change, we could expect more of these mega fires. And if that was the case, I've just had some ember mapping done for all of Ku-ring-gai, actually, and most of it, including the developed spine of Ku-ring-gai along the Pacific Highway, certain areas there are also subject to ember attacks. So we're certainly not immune. Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks, Mark. So what we're going to do is we're going to ignite this fire. And as James pointed out earlier, that blue circle in the top left-hand corner allows us to control the wind speed and direction. So what we'll do as the day progresses, we'll increase the wind speed and we'll see how that affects the fire behaviour. Now, there's a fire model sitting behind this visualisation, and it reacts to the terrain and it reacts to the wind speed. It also reacts to temperature and humidity. We've got the temperature set at 35, I think it is, degrees, and around 10% humidity. So I've got it very dry, very hot, as the type of day you can imagine on the back of a long dry period. So the fire ignites. Now, we don't, they're embers that have come across from the Gosford Mountain fire and have landed in the national park. So at this point, what would RFS be doing?
Thanks, Jenny. So depending on the fire danger rating on the day, there may have been some preparation done in standing up crews for a particularly bad fire day. And what that would mean is that there would be strike teams allocated that would be on very short notice to attend to any reports of fires. So if this fire was spotted, it gets reported by 000. That goes through to Fire and Rescue New South Wales in Alexandria, and they then allocate to whether Fire and Rescue or RFS or both attend the incident. Generally speaking, now it's both, as we want to try and get the nearest and most appropriate appliance to the incident, and we will get a page that will say, attend to the station, and then we'll get instructions to investigate this fire, and we would send the trucks, a strike team, which would be 5 trucks if it was a bad day, to Ku-ring-gai Chase Road. Fire and rescue would be doing likewise. The idea being to try and get as much information as we can on the fire, what it's doing, how significant it is, whether it is a fire, and what action can then be taken. If it is a bad day, the RFS always will also have aerial assets on standby at Bankstown, but their availability depends on what else they're doing and obviously conditions as to whether they can fly. But certainly on a bad day, they'd have a chopper up to also try and get to this to see if they can see what it's doing. So that's what we'd be doing. And then once we get there, we would do what's called a sit rep back to fire control, saying this is the situation, it's a going fire, it's moving in this direction, it's this size, and we'd be recommending getting additional units because it's, unless we could get around it, if it's in the bush, that would be difficult, particularly if it's moving in a south eastern direction, and we would start recommending that they prepare further strike teams to head to North Turramurra in the event that it's not being contained.
Right. Okay.
And fire and rescue would be doing the same.
Right. Yep. So what we have here is a fire that is slowly establishing itself. If we work on the scenario that this is on the back of a rapid expansion of Gosper Mountain fire into the urban areas of the Hills District and Hornsby and now Ku-ring-gai, the availability of appliances is going to be very stretched. So this is where householders come in without this idea of shared responsibility that we all have a role to play in keeping ourselves and our properties safe. We're never going to have the capacity to deal with a kind of scenario that this one could develop into. So what we do is we get you to think about, well, what is it that you would be doing now? And we'll have a look at Climate Wise Communities, the website, because it's going to give you a few ideas as to the sorts of things that you could be doing now, that you've already planned. If you work your way through the Climate Wise website and put that all into a fire plan, you're going to have a lot of very good information that's got all kinds of different contingencies built into it. And the first step in all of this is that we need to understand what is the specific risks to our property. So we'll just go straight to the first step. And the first step will get you to put in your street address, and it will come up with the outline of your property and to show you the sorts of hazards that it could be subject to. So James is just popping in a random address. And as it slowly resolves, you'll see the different colours relate to different kinds of hazards. So internet's very slow tonight. But if you look at the legend, you'll see that the blue is relevant to flooding, that the reddish colour is around bushfire prone vegetation, and the yellow is in flame contact area. So if you have your property as this one, it gives you a kind of an idea of the hazards that you need to plan for. Now, for these people, possibly flash floods are their key concern. But there's also bushfire considerations. As you can see, the bushland follows the creek up like a little tongue into the deeper urban area. So if we scroll down a little bit from this one, it'll bring up a summary of the things you need to be planning for. So it's planning for bushfire, for ember attack. They've got a number of ways they can get in and out, so exit issues aren't a problem. But flood and storm and heat wave are significant for every property in Ku-ring-gai. So that will just automatically be ticked because there's nowhere in Ku-ring-gai that isn't vulnerable to storm and heat waves. Now you can save that information to your PDF, and that gives you the basis for your plan. If we move on to the second step, which is more about your personal situation. And again, this is a series of tick the boxes questions that gets you to really examine closely your circumstances in your household, whether you live alone or with others. And then when you tick on whichever one it is, it will give you an idea about why that's significant to your bushfire plan. So the number of people in the household and their characteristics, whether people have health or medical conditions and how you might have to plan for that. And if you're a carer for people who are not necessarily living with you, how are you going to access these people in their time of need, particularly if the roads get closed? You've got to think that's a trigger for early evacuation. And as we go down, we look at if you have pets in the household and the sorts of considerations that might need to be given to having them safely removed out of harm's way. Whether or not you've got your own transport, of course. We had one lady say to us, she was well into her 80s, that yes, if an emergency happened, her neighbour was going to drive her and her husband out. And her neighbour was in her 90s. So possibly strategies like that need to be more carefully examined. Whether or not English is proficient in the household so that people understand the warnings that they might be hearing. Whether or not you own your own home is significant because if you own your own home, you can do things to it that make it much more resilient to, particularly as Mark said, ember attack. If you're a renter, you've got to negotiate it with the landlord. But if you can make it more resilient, sometimes they're fairly low cost things you can do, putting gutter guards on, etc. And other times there's major refurbishments that are really needed. We look at the phone connection, as you heard, for the fire in Paradise. They lost their cell phone towers. And of course, if we've only got mobile phone because the landline now relies on that connectivity through the NBN, then we have no way of communicating if both those go down. So you need to think about, well, how am I going to get the information and how am I going to let people know what I'm doing if that's the case? So again, you can put all that information into the PDF and it will be saved for you and only for you. This doesn't get saved on the council website at all. So we'll break and go back to the fire and see where it's progressed to. So now the spot fires are starting. The wind speed is still fairly modest. So we'll pick the wind speed up a little bit. It's coming out of the northwest. It'll be hot and it'll be dry. So at this point in time, what do you think the messaging that might be going out to the northern areas of Ku-ring-gai, Mark?
Yeah, we'll have our local emergency management committee up. That includes council, fire and rescue, RFS, SES and police. Police are really important because you can see it heading towards North Turramurra. Remember, North Turramurra's got about 5,000 people in it. One way in, one way out. You certainly don't go down to Bobbin Head if there's a fire going because that's all bushland. So you'd have to come out through a very busy intersection. Police would have to man that intersection to actually aid traffic to get out of Bobbin Head Road. So yeah, all those issues are really important. People would have to be going around door knocking houses, RFS in particular would door knock houses. Get out now if possible, if that route is clear. North Turramurra is a priority area in our bushfire management plan that's just been developed for the next 5 years. It's a priority area because of one way in, one way out. But some of the other areas further east in St Ives are much the same on, because most of our housing is on the peninsulas. So we're surrounded by bushland on our urban peninsulas. Yep, so certainly a very big response.
I should add, Jenny, that the other messaging that would happen that residents will get directly is if they have the Fires Near Me app on their phone, the initial fire would have come out as an icon, just as advice, whilst we were trying to get, a handle on whether it was a real fire and what it was doing. That would have moved very quickly to a watch and act as it started to grow and move towards North Turramurra. But at this point, there would be a broadcasted emergency warning for North Turramurra because of, a relatively imminent potential for it to impact North Turramurra. So, residents should download the Fires Near Me app. It's a great way of keeping track of fires. It's updated regularly. And then, of course, also listen to your local radio station and television stations as they also broadcast the emergency warnings.
And I think the key message in all these areas where the access is restricted to one road in, one road out, is don't be there. You need to get out early, because people worry about the roads being congested, but they'll only be congested if people leave it too late to leave. So the message that leaving early is just so imperative.
Jenny, can I just add to that? In the South Turramurra fire, an emergency warning to shelter in place was actually issued 10 minutes after the fire started because of the catastrophic conditions on that day. So, being prepared is really important. And you may not always be able to leave. So having a plan in place is a really good idea. And now's a unique opportunity with minimal fire danger to actually plan and prepare in spring and early summer.
I believe the advice we were giving people the day before that catastrophic fire day was to not worry and don't wait for a fire to start. Just not be there, go somewhere else for the day, so that if worse comes to worse and the fire does impact your area, you're not worrying about getting out.
Because you can also see
Absolutely.
those spot overs there heading very quickly east. And look at that one just on the western side of St Ives Chase. It just popped up very quickly. So it shows how little time there really is, truly.
So every time the fire gets to the top of a ridge, particularly when the wind's blowing a little harder, that's when the embers take off and travel further and further ahead of the fire front. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to look at your property and the characteristics of your property so that you can understand just how vulnerable your house is to ember attack and radiant heat. Now, in some cases, there are people living on the interface who have houses that are built prior to any bushfire building standard and that are highly vulnerable to bushfire. And the best thing those people can do is make sure they have enough insurance. But there are things you can do around the property to try and limit the likelihood of your property igniting. So if we scroll down a bit, one of the things we get people to do is a little mud map of their property, just showing the key features, how close the vegetation and anything else that might be flammable is to the house, whether you have a pool, in which case you might have a static water supply label at your front gate showing RFS and fire and rescue that there is a water source here they can use to help fight the fire. And you can start thinking about whether or not you need to think about your landscaping in all of this as well. So not just the features of the house, but also the landscape. So when we go down to the actual features of the property. We're interested in this instance in bushfire, although a lot of things that you would do for bushfire will have benefits for storm as well. So if it comes up in red, it means it's a serious weakness to ember attack and to radiant heat. Whereas if it's green, it's more resilient. Doesn't mean it can't burn. Any house will burn if the conditions are right, but it is more resilient. So you get to look at the description of the roof types, and you'll be able to work out from that whether your roof type is a red one or an orange one or a blue one or a green one. Most housing roof types are there. And you can get further information on why those different areas of roof design are vulnerable. But it's usually about the points of entry for the embers to lodge. So we look at roof sprinklers as well. And I think, was it you, Nick, who was saying the roof sprinklers need to be along the ridge line or around the edge? I think it was around the edge.
I can't recall saying it, but yes, normally it's around the edges where the embers are going to get in is the most vulnerable place for entry, and therefore most of them missed along the edges of the gutters. Any water on the roof obviously is going to be of assistance, but usually it's around the edges that the embers are potentially going to enter.
Yeah. And one of the things the researchers showed that as a fire front approaches, the temperature differential between the outdoor temperature and the indoor temperature makes the indoor area a bit of a vacuum. So it will actually suck the hot air in through all the little nooks and crannies. And of course, it will bring with it the embers. So if you are sheltering in place, you've got to think about where would you shelter in place. And Nick or Sam, have you got advice about that?
Yes, so generally, if you do, you go, Sam.
Go.
Yeah, so generally, if you're sheltering in place, you want to shelter in a location that's on the lee side of the fire, obviously, so that you've got a buffer between you and the radiant heat and the ember attack. You want to keep an eye though on those rooms that are close to it, so that if there are embers that get into the house, you might be able to deal with them, with a pot of water or whatever the case may be. And you really want to be keeping an eye on exactly what the fire's doing. I mean, even before you get into the house, you really need to continue to walk around the house and make sure that there's no embers that have fallen near the house that you could deal with quite easily by just putting them out, rather than actually have them, start a fire that then starts to consume the houses as well. So there's that's what you're really looking for.
Yeah, I think the other aspect of that is that whichever room you shelter in needs to have more than one way in and out. So you need to be able to get direct access to the exterior of the building should the interior ignite and you can't get out of that room.
And also to be able to see outside to know when the fire has passed.
Yes, yes. So what has happened over the years for a few people is they've been sheltering in the house and the fire front's passed. But what they didn't know was that the embers had ignited their roof space and they've been inside when the roof has collapsed. So really quite important to get out and just see whether or not that roof area is on fire. So if we move down, we also looked at all different aspects of your home, your eaves and your fascias, your gutters and your downpipes. And you'll always hear the message, clean your gutters, clean your gutters. Now that's an absolute bare minimum. There's lots of things you can do about your gutters to keep the combustible material out of them. And as we scroll on down, we also look at the type of walls and what condition they're in and how fire retardant they are. Window frames are an important one, as well as external doors, because they themselves can ignite. Wooden window frames in particular. So you've got to think about doormats sitting at the front door, highly combustible. You've got to think where about your gas tanks are and which way are they pointing. If they vent when they get super hot, you want them to vent the flame away from the house, not into the house. The subfloor space, as Mark commented on before, don't store combustible materials under your floor. You need to have some fire retardant timber to enclose the floor space and keep it fairly well maintained. So there's a limited prospect of any fire igniting under there. And as we scroll on, we also, as I mentioned earlier, look at the outdoor space and some of the landscaping. And where those plants are and how close to the house they might be. Mark, I know you inspect a lot of properties for bushfire risk. Have you got any advice on this aspect?
Yeah, certainly. A lot of people have mulch. It's extremely combustible mulch, particularly if it's near your house. Just be very wary. The other thing, we all love our plants, of course, large and small, whether they be shrubs or small trees in our yard. Try and keep them separated so crowns don't touch, and also try and keep both vertical separation and horizontal separation. So you've got spaces between plants. So it doesn't, how would I say, create a fire run straight to your house. There's all that type of issue. And CFA in Victoria produces a wonderful landscape guide for how to, in fire-prone environments. So that's worth a look on the internet. They can contact me, people, if they want one. Thanks.
And we talk about the water supply, whether you've got a tank, a water tank that's got a volume in it that's dedicated to firefighting, whether you have a pool, whether you have a pump, whether you have a diesel pump. So the kind of pump that doesn't rely on the energy supply from an external source. So if the power goes down, you don't want your pump to be useless. We talk about fences and gates and gas bottles, as were just mentioned. And there are a few other little aspects about air conditioners and the age of the house and the standard, and whether or not they come anywhere near to the bushfire attack level ratings that are required these days for properties to be built on the bushland interface. Mark, do you want to say something about the BAL ratings?
Yeah, actually, if you're getting an extension done, if you're in a bushfire prone area, it's mapped by RFS and ourselves. If you're in that area and get an extension done, you'll have to go through what's called the BAL ratings. They'll determine what BAL rating you should be. BAL, or the bushfire attack level, goes from low right through to flame zone, and it's based on kilowatts per square metre, the amount of energy, flame energy actually hitting your wall that's nearest to the hazard or the vegetation. And low might be 2 to 3 kilowatts a square metre, which is still enough to kill a person within 15 to 20 seconds if you haven't got a fire suit on. And it goes up to over 40 kilowatts per square metre. You just don't want to be there then, I can tell you that. So yeah, the BAL ratings are extremely important. They go from low to BAL 19.5, BAL 29, BAL 40, up to BAL flame zone, where a house is supposed to withstand bushfire passing, but you still don't want to really be in that house. Thanks.
Right, thank you, Mark. Okay, let's go back and see what our fire's doing. Do we have fire and rescue with us tonight?
Yes, Mark Mackay is here for Cal McNamara, but I'm having problems with my camera, so I'm watching, but you You can't see me.
Oh, well, look, just feel free to add anything as we go along.
Thank you.
So the fire now has spread to quite a significant fire front. We'll pick the wind up again. It's gusting to 70 kilometres. We'll take it up to 95, which is the maximum that this particular simulation can do. And you'll see the fire front is expanding deeper and deeper into urban areas. Now, I'm sure you've already worked it out, that the yellow is the fire front. The red parts are the fully involved in fire, and the black parts are the parts that have extinguished because they've consumed all the fuel. So you can see more spot fires starting deeper down towards St Ives and going over towards the showground. Now, one of the things that happens quite often is that we have these hot summer days, and sometimes we get those southerly busters, which are generally very welcome. But we'll have a look at how the southerly buster affects the fire in this particular instance. So we shift the wind direction around to coming from the south and look at the way the fire starts to behave now. So areas that would have thought they were safe are suddenly now directly in the line of the fire. So at this point, Nick, what would be happening with RFS?
Yes, so just before we get on to that, so what this shows is that the head of the fire is generally what we call, is where the fire is heading. And you would have seen that prior to that wind change, the head was quite narrow. But what's happened, we've now had that wind change. And so what we call the flank of the fire, the side of the fire, has now become the head of the fire, and it's over a much broader area. So a lot more land and property in front of that fire is going to be impacted. So that's the key issue when you have these wind changes. So what would be happening at the moment, in fact, has probably been happening for most of the day of this fire, is that Fire and Rescue New South Wales and ourselves will be doing what we call property protection. So we know we can't put the fire out. All we can do is to protect the property that is property and life that is in its path. So we would have trucks right around North Turramurra, right around those retirement villages and the nursing homes, etc. Also trucks in St Ives Chase and over on towards Monavale Road. By this time, and it's probably worthwhile mentioning, is that, you know, if you look at the RFS and Fire and Rescue for that that matter, we only have a finite number of trucks in the local area. So for the RFS in the Hornsby Ku-ring-gai area, we've probably got about 20, I'd say 25 trucks, large trucks, Cat 1s. I'm not sure what Fire and Rescue have. So we really rely on getting trucks in from other districts. And that's why, as I mentioned before, we spent most of that season going up and down the coast helping other communities, because we rely on those communities to send their trucks down to help us. So at this stage, we would have had strike teams coming in from the hills, northern beaches, probably up from the Illawarra, down from the Blue Mountains, down from the Hunter, providing that they're not needed up there. And hopefully we now have, you know, a couple of hundred trucks in the Ku-ring-gai area. Aerial assets would also be working hard on this if they could. If it's during the day, they can still do water bombing. We're currently testing, as I understand it, nighttime bombing. So for future fire seasons, that might be an option as well. But primarily we are focused on property protection, just protecting property, not trying to put the fire out. At this point, with that wind change, an emergency warning would have been issued for Duffy's Forest, as you can see in the north-east side of the screen, and strike teams would have been sent over there as well to set up for property protection, alongside fire and rescue. So fire and rescue will be very much getting in front of the houses and around the houses where possible. And to be honest, we wouldn't be able to get into the bush anyway, so we would be around the houses as well.
And I suppose the reality is you're not going to be able to protect every house.
No, that's right, and it's a really difficult time when you drive into a street and there are houses that are being impacted. And what we have to do is we basically have to do what we call triage, and triage the properties that we think we can protect and save, and not obviously waste a lot of resources on something that's already fully involved. And generally the ones that we can save are the ones that are best prepared. So, you know, they've prepared their homes, they've cleared out all of the rubbish around the house, they've made adjustments to the exterior of the house to stop embers coming in, etc. And that's ones that we can actually protect, and others that are littered with rubbish, that have got flammable material right up against the house, etc., are probably the ones that we're not going to be able to save.
Yes, so there is a fair responsibility back on the property owner to make your property as resilient as you can, in order, so if a fire truck doesn't get there, it's got a fair chance of still being there when you go back. So it's all about hardening up that property so that it resists these fires. So the next stage in climate-wise communities is looking at how you might work with your neighbourhood in these kind of situations. So what happens in areas that have coped the best with these extreme fires are those neighbourhoods that are well connected and are well prepared. So not only are they looking at their own property, but they're looking at what they can do to help their neighbours. Because the old motto, we're stronger together, is never more true than in this circumstance. So if your neighbour's property is also going to be more resilient, then the chances of your house igniting because the one beside it has caught a fire is reduced. So there's definite dividends to your property to help make sure the neighbours' properties are being looked after. So we get you to draw another little mud map of your neighbourhood, and we look at the people that you're going to tell prior to leaving, when you're leaving, where you're going, so that people know when and where to follow up with you to make sure you got out safely. We also get you to think about the people in your neighbourhood who, if you're not home, might be able to help get your pets out, or if your elderly mother is there alone, help your old elderly mother get out. So we've had for instance, a lady telling us a story of, she had 2 small children and they were packed, ready to go. She put them in the car, and the neighbour from next door came across and said her eldest son had just dropped a pot plant on his toe and cut his toe off. Could she come and help? So these unexpected things are things that you're going to have to anticipate could happen. You may be asked for help in the most inopportune times. How are you going to deal with that? You may not be able to get access to your relatives or get your children to a safe place in time. They may be in school, and that might be the safest place for them. So you've got to think about all these things and work out how you might work with your neighbours to make sure those people who are most vulnerable can get out, and that your property has the best chance of resisting the embers and the radiant heat. So we go through that again, question and answer, and a lot of the answers will give you information about what you can do in your plan to make sure that you're prepared with your neighbourhood, talking to your neighbourhood about how you're going to deal with these situations. And I think that brings us almost to the end. Of course, the trigger of when to leave, that's a really interesting one. Lots of people I knew in Black Summer had a trigger to leave, and when it got to that trigger, they hesitated because they thought they might not really have to leave. So if you set a trigger to leave, you need to stick to it. Just go. Best advice is don't be there if the fire arrives. So anybody else want to add anything here?
Yes, Mark McKay. I think Jenny's comment about not being there is one of the critical things, because I think after the Victorian fires in 2009, one of the key parts of that, even in homes that were well constructed, which had people with pumps and capable of defending their homes, still there were fatalities. So you should not be there. There had a lot of deaths in cars, people rushing around cars and crashing into fallen wires and trees, and not being able to see in the smoke. So generally, when you have a bushfire, the sort of elevated conditions take 2 or 3 days to build up. So you usually have some sort of day of dangerous fire weather. So I think you're very conservative and decide if you don't need to be there, don't be there, because there's no certainty that you can protect your home or that you can get out when you have to leave at the last minute.
Yep, very, very good advice. So there are, unless somebody else had anything to say? No? No? Okay. So James, if we go back to you and you can look at the wheel.
Yes, indeed. A very important part of the Clanwise Community's website is the actual what if wheel. So what we'd like to ask people to do is that once you've made your bushfire survival plan, or it could be even a flood, heat wave, or storm plan, you can test your plan with what we call the what if wheel. But inside the office, we actually call it the wheel of misfortune.
It might be just me, James, but it's hard to hear you.
I moved my microphone away. Sorry.
That's better.
Sorry. What we like to call this thing is the wheel of misfortune, because it does throw up all the a selection of different scenarios that can happen during a bushfire that could trip you up and throw obstacles in your way and make your bushfire plan a bit redundant. So we ask that people, when they make a bushfire survival plan, it's a written bushfire survival plan. There's no point having it inside your head. It's good to have it written down, shared, and stored in a place where it's easily accessible, especially if you move into bushfire season. However, you can make emergency plans for a bushfire, flood, heat wave, and storm, and test each one of those plans against various what-if wheel. So, Jenny, would you like to kick off the proceedings on spinning the wheel?
Yep. So we spin the wheel, and it will come up with a random issue that in the 2009 fires was a very common problem. In this case, your pet is missing. Now, there were many people who refused point blank to leave without their pet. They weren't going till they could find it. And so the message here is, well before you think you might have to leave, when things are still calm, you need to get your pet and somehow restrain them. Put the pet in a pet carrier or tie your dog up so that the pet is there when you want to go. Not too many people in Ku-ring-gai have horses. That's a whole nother ball game. But you can go through and look at all these, spin the wheel as many times as you like, and just think about how would your bushfire plan deal with that problem if it came up. So that's what this wheel of misfortune, as James calls it, is all about. And it's one of the tools that the RMIT people came up with. Now, council has a number of different ways of supporting people to take action to harden up their properties. We have a couple of rebate programs, James, that's your area.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. We do have two rebate programs that could be of benefit to residents in Ku-ring-gai. The first one is the Bushfire Wise rebate program. So what this is about is helping residents to kickstart the retrofit process where they can harden up their homes to bushfire, principally ember attack. As Mark mentioned, ember attack is the main way in which houses are lost during bushfire. And luckily, ember attack is often the cheapest and easiest thing to address, and should be the first thing you should tackle. However, everyone's property is different, so it's up to the individual to decide what it is that they want to do. The rebate covers 25% of the cost of retrofit work, up to a maximum of $1,000. Now, we do have a top up for homeowners that want to replace things like windows and doors, and they are on bushfire prone land, because if they do want to replace their windows or doors on bushfire prone land, well, then that does trigger a CDC, which is a complying development certificate, or a DA, which is a development application. And there are fees associated, council fees associated with that. So to help them with those, we offer a 50% rebate for those fees, up to a maximum of $500. So the total a resident can claim is $1,500. So we do have a list of areas of the house that can be covered by rebate. You can read it there. And you can find this webpage by simply typing Bushfire Wise into the search bar at the top of the window here on any council webpage. So when you're ready to make an application, all you need to do is click this button here, the submit your pre-approved application there. Select what work you're going to do. Put in your details and submit your application. It will come to me. I'll send you an email and give you a call and send you information on or send you some details on the information you need to supply us. And it's quite straightforward. It's step 3 of the ready check. Jenny went through that already. That addresses your property. So you essentially do a property assessment there. Then you send in your bushfire survival plan. You can download a template from the RFS website, fill that in, and then send that into me as well, along with a quote and specifications of the type of retrofit work you want to do. For example, if you want to replace or install gutter guards in your gutters, you'll supply me with a quote of how much it's going to cost, photographs of your gutters as they are now, and then the type of material it is and the size of the aperture in the gutter guards, just to make sure that it works well for you and will actually do the job. And then once that's all done, I'll give you a pre-approval number, and you can go ahead and get your retrofit done. When that's completed and you've paid for it, then you can submit your final claim application. Again, very similar to the first step, very straightforward. You send me your paid invoices and photographs of the installed gutter guards, for example, and then I will then issue you your rebate. So the other rebate I mentioned that might be of interest to residents is the Water Smart rebate program. This allows is a rebate of up to $1,000 for rainwater tanks. So that's $500 for a rainwater tank 3,000 liters or larger, plus up to $500 for 2 connections to the rainwater tank that can be used for a permanent irrigation system or connected to a sprinkler system, for example, for your roof for bushfire work. And so that way you can get the maximum value of the rebates, because the Bushfire Wise rebate does offer rebates for rainwater tanks, but you might find it's better to split the rebates for one for the rainwater tank and then one for other retrofit work around the house. And excuse me. One other thing I wanted to do before we kicked off with the workshop is to do a quick poll to gather some information about you and where you are at in terms of your bushfire preparedness. So if you don't mind, I'll ask you to complete a short poll of 10 questions. It's very easy to do, and I'll be very very grateful if you to just take a little bit of extra time and complete this poll for me. And there'll be another poll after this. Again, just only 2 questions, so it'll be very quick. So
we've got a question in the chat, James.
Okay, cool. Well, while people are doing the short poll survey, I'll address the question in the chat there. Hi, Jenny and James. Would you also like to speak about the HRs and their
That's me.
effectiveness and constraints?
That's for both of you.
Okay.
I'd like to speak a little bit. Many
Sure.
people ask me in my role about the effectiveness of hazard reduction burning. And it's been harder and harder for council, RFS, and also now fire and rescue to undertake our hazard reduction burns. And actually council has its own burn team. A window of opportunity for burning has got less and less because of the 3rd year of La Nina. But also people have to realise that after a burn, the fuel builds up quite rapidly. And with the wetter weather we're having, after 3 to 4 years, there's sufficient fuel again to carry a fire. So also we have to watch when we do a burn that the burn is also good for the animals and plants, what they call the ecological fire regime. So often, once we've had a burn, we can't have another burn for ecological purposes for another 8 to 10 years. So you've therefore got that gap between about 4 years and 8 to 9 years where you can't have another burn. So the fuel will build up. So we try and alternate the spatial arrangement of burns within the landscape to try and minimise fuels to block certain, how would I say, fire paths that come up, corridors, that type of thing. So yeah, it's quite a strategic effort to try and have hazard reduction burning. The other issue that comes up is smoke. A lot of people ring up council about smoke when we do have a burn, and the EPA, in their wisdom or not, within about 5 to 8 years in the Sydney Basin, due to the temperature inversions, it could be very difficult, apart from a few priority big burns, for councils and even fire and rescue to undertake burns in the future. So that's another issue. So hazard reduction burns, they have great value, but they have limited effectiveness when we get these extreme weather conditions, even though they can minimise the impact on houses and people. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. There's hundreds of research papers each year on this sort of topic, and we try and keep abreast of the latest research and incorporate it into our fire planning. So it's all, yeah, it's fire management isn't simple. I've spent about 20 years of my life in the fire planning side. It certainly stretches my brain anyway. Thanks.
Can I just add to that as well, Mark? During the Black Summer fire season, we had several areas in Gospers Mountain, for example, that had fires burn through at extreme levels within 3 weeks of each other, coming back and forth, regardless of the reduction in fuel. So with the right or the wrong conditions, no hazard reduction is actually going to eliminate risk. So right back to leaving early and being prepared to do that is more important.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing, that you don't want to risk relying on a hazard reduction burn. You want to be prepared regardless of how long it is since the fuel, or even how wide the asset protection zone at the back of your property is. That doesn't guarantee you're going to be safe. So you still need to take all these actions regardless.
It's like building a house. The more layers you have of protection, the better off, in case one of those layers isn't that effective in a certain type of fire, because each fire is different in its characteristics. So yeah, the more layers of protection you've got, the better the outcome.
We have a question from John. Can you talk about the role of the community fire units and how people can get involved in their local unit? I think that one's for the New South Wales Fire and Rescue.
Yes, it is.
Hello? Okay, well, we do have, I think in my walks around the St. Ives area, I did come across a few residents that were members of the community fire units in the area. So I believe that this program is run by the New South Wales Fire and Rescue. So if you do want to get join in this program, we do highly recommend it. Actually, it's a great activity to be part of, a great team to participate in. Just contact New South Wales Fire and Rescue, and they should be able to help you set one up or join one that might be in your street. Though I think it's important to note that the the community fire units are really for, I think, low-level fires that aren't too threatening and not at a manageable level. And the community fire units are mostly tasked with putting out spot fires or embers that
That's correct.
pop up around the houses. However, when conditions get to a certain level, it's quite likely the community fire units will be advised to pull back and to seek shelter, because they're not necessarily, while they have some great equipment, they're not necessarily trained and supported in the same way New South Wales Fire and Rescue is and RFS are. So maybe Sam and Nick, you want to add to that?
Very often also the community fire unit only has access to mains water, which in the event of a major fire will probably be incredibly depleted and will actually put them in a position of danger. So my understanding is, I'm happy to be corrected, is they really are there to manage spot fires when there is no danger to their life, and to allow fire and rescue and the RFS to step in and take over.
Great. Thanks, Sam and Nick. So please keep those questions coming and pop them into the Q&A box, and definitely take the opportunity now to have all your questions answered. So Haley raised her hand. Haley, could you please put your question into the Q&A box? I think that's probably the best way of having your question answered. Or maybe even if you can't find your Q&A box, maybe put it in the chat function, just type your question in there. So while we wait for people to think about the questions they want to ask, I'd like to say thank you very much for everyone for answering those that poll. So I'll end the poll now and quickly launch a second poll. Now this is very quick, and this is about making bushfire survival plans. So I'll launch the poll now, and hopefully you should see it on your screens shortly. And apologies for the background noise. The cleaners have run around with their vacuum cleaner. So again, apologies for any background noise. So what this is that I'd like to ask you if you plan to make a written bushfire survival plan in the next month, or next 2 months. You know, it doesn't have to be exactly 1 month. And now if you already have a very comprehensive plan, click that. Or if you don't plan on making a bushfire survival plan and you want to wing it in the next bushfire, go for it. Question 2, would you like to receive some reminder emails with tips that can help you along the way? Again, I won't be offended if you click no. Already someone has, so I won't take that personally. That's okay. So what I'll be doing in these reminder emails, I'll send them over the course of maybe 2 months. And what I'll do is I'll just send them about 3 emails, and I will sort of include various tips and tricks we can do, various strategies you can do to help you make a bushfire survival plan, because it's not the most fun thing to do. It's something which people don't sit down with a bottle of wine and go, yes, I can't wait to make a bushfire survival plan. That's what I've been waiting for, an excuse to do it all year long. It's something which is a bit unpleasant. Sometimes people might need a bit of a nudge or a bump to do that. And so these emails I'll be sending you will be just these little tips and tricks you can help do it, and allows you to, if you have any questions, you can always send them through to me, and I'll forward them on to Sam and Nick. And Mike from the New South Wales Fire and Rescue, and Mark. And if you do complete your bushfire survival plan, please feel free to email it through to me, and I can ask Sam and Nick to have a quick look over it and provide you with some feedback. Anyway, so thank you very much to everyone for answering that poll. I'll get on to that shortly. So I think that pretty much wraps up the most. I think the bulk of the workshop, unless there's something else people want to. Oh, hold on, we have some questions.
I can answer a question from John about when is a planned burn planned for the area north of St Ives Chase. The area north of St Ives Chase, that's National Park, and we work also with National Parks and Wildlife. There's a burn called Kayleys, which is planned it's on the program now, and all depending, it should be this summer, the summer of 22-23, depending on weather conditions, you know, which are so tight. The prescription has to be very tight to have a burn. So yeah, there is one planned for that area north of Timbara Avenue. So just to let you know. And actually we're working, there's a 5-year burn plan being worked out at the moment, the Hornsby Ku-ring-gai Bushfire Management Committee, which all of us are partners in. There's a 5-year burn program on the west side of Ku-ring-gai, north side of Ku-ring-gai, and down into Garigal National Park. So no area is forgotten, so to speak. Yeah, that's that question.
We have a question from Haley. Would it be possible to include information on websites on fire retardant treatment for decks, fences that are already installed? We can't find any info anywhere on suitable products. I think the reason why you can't find any suitable products is because it might not be the best approach to turning a flammable fence less flammable. I'm sure Sam and Nick and Mark would say that it's probably best to replace the fence with a ColourBond or metal. I think that's really it's probably the simplest way of going about it, because if those products were to exist and were effective, I'm sure, and even ecologically safe, because I imagine they're not the most environmentally friendly products if they did exist, they would be available, but I'm not aware of anything myself. So Haley, is it a what kind of timber? I take it it's a pine deck, softwood treated pine. It's worth noting that some timber species, such as blackbutt or Australian hardwoods, are BAL rated to up to 19. Mark, is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Timbers have their own fire ratings, and actually, believe it or not, turpentine timber, which was used in the wharves around Sydney, is fairly fire resistant compared to many timbers. Believe it or not, you wouldn't think so, looking at the big turpentine trees around the place. So yeah, various species are better than others. Certainly not pine. Pine catches very easily.
Especially, I think treated pine is even worse than untreated
Yes,
pine.
it is.
It
That's
burns
true.
more ferociously and
It
releases more
certainly
toxic
does.
fumes.
Yep.
So if you do have a pine deck, I would recommend saving up and having it replaced with a less flammable timber species.
And even metal, if that
even
can
metal,
be done.
indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
There are products on the
Preferably.
market that are composite plastic and timber fiber, which, while not fireproof, are definitely fire resistant, and they can be quite effective solutions too. So sorry we couldn't give you a definitive answer for that one, Haley. We have another question from Ina. Sorry if you have time to answer, which we do always have time to answer questions on bushfire. Would I contact, who could I contact to try and get this program running for a different LGA? Me and Dr. Jenny Scott. This program is available for any council to adopt, and it's free. So the website especially is free. So if you're calling from a different LGA, by all means, send us an email via the website if you don't already have email addresses, and we can set you up with a way to adopt this this website and program. And it's come one, come all, and we'd like to share this around. Jenny, would you like to comment on that at all?
We've been sharing it around for a number of years. So yeah, it's something the council feels it can do to contribute to the wider community, and decided to make it freely available. We have people in the US using it, so it's gone not just around Australia, it's also gone overseas. So yeah, welcome to have a chat about it.
I think so far we have Ride Council has a copy of Climate Communities. Wallandilly, Byron Bay, Noosa Council is quite advanced along the way of looking at that, I think, and then Wingecarribee as well is looking at developing a version of the website. So it is spreading, and it's definitely of value to other council areas. So we'd highly recommend other places take it up. So unless we have any other questions, it's getting a bit late. It's about 8:45 now. So if there's any other questions, please, by all means, send them through and we will answer them. Otherwise, if nothing comes through the next little bit, hold on, we do have a question, sorry. Where is it? Sorry, in terms of fireproofing your house, is there any info on the council website outlining the changes you can make that don't require council approval, complying DA, versus changes that require approval? Good question. Now, most retrofits you can do to your house don't require any specific applications. Now, any planning questions are a bit tricky for me to answer because it's always on the onus is always on the homeowner to figure that one out and then contact council and make an application. So if you have any specific questions, by all means, send them through to me via the Climate Wise Communities website. There's an Ask an Expert or a contact form you can use, and those emails will come to me. So you can put those questions into email there, and I'll look into it for you and provide you with the best kind of answer I can, and refer you to the council duty planner, who again is best placed to answer any questions about whether or not retrofit requires planning approval. Typically, houses in BAL 29 up to BAL 40 and flame zone, some retrofit items then require DA or CDC. And in the lower BAL ratings, the requirements for CDC or DAs are lesser. However, things like windows and doors, regardless of BAL rating, definitely straight away trigger some form of a CDC or DA. So again, I can, help you sort of narrow it down a bit more, but I do have to put that caveat in that I'm not a planner. So don't come to me if something goes wrong. I'll always put that caveat in and ask that you kind of verify any advice yourself, and definitely speak to a planner or a bushfire consultant. Actually, is a good person to ask. They exist. There's quite a few of them in North Sydney. If you contact them, they can do a BAL assessment for you, and then advise you on what or not require a CDC or DA. So that I think would be the best port of call, actually.
I just answered a question to Annika too about landscaping, so she'll contact me anyway. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, fantastic. Okay. So if are there any last questions or comments from the panel? No? Okay, great.
So much to know. Yeah, there's a lot out there to take in, but it's quite freely available and many people willing to help too. A council, RFS and Fire and Rescue, we all work together. So that's the best thing to help the community.
Well, I'd like to wrap up the workshop. It's and say thank you very much again to our wonderful panelists from the New South Wales Fire and Rescue, and from the RFS, Mark and Dr. Jenny and Sam, Nick and Mike for coming along. Your time spent at the workshop here is invaluable, and I'm sure the residents really got a lot out of it, and it has given them lots of things to think about, and luckily the rain has given them some time to prepare the bushfire survival plans before things start drying out and we're back to usual operations of keeping an eye out for fire. So I'll wrap. Last thing I'll say is that council has a lot of great sustainability events coming on in the pipeline. We have a water smart rainwater tank rebate, rainwater tank workshop. I think that's on the 20th of October. You can find out the exact date and time on the council's What's On website. They will also have other events run by the sustainability team. There will also be a storm workshop, I think in March or April next year. So Ku-ring-gai Council does sit in a storm corridor. We do get more rain than any other part of Sydney. and we do cop it in terms of damaging storms. So it could be hail, trees crashing around us due to microbursts or other things, and East Coast lows. So we'll be working that. We will be doing that workshop with the SES as well. So highly recommend you come along to that, and go forth and make your bushfire survival plans. And I will be in touch with you via email over the coming months about those. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. And oh, we have one question. Sorry. Oh yeah, thank you for everyone for your time. Yes. Watching the yellow outline of the fire of the simulation creep along has helped my fire attention and make my plans. Yes, that was exactly the intention. So hope you do make your plans. All right. And on that note, I'll say thank you very much. All right. Good evening.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.